untold numbers of regimes who have risen up to do the socialism, have killed a few million people, have done a few, done a bit of genocide, and then finally collapsed until capitalism could rise from the ashes like a phoenix.
Can you, Sanzel, go ahead and describe what you consider socialism?
Yeah, I was thinking that would be the first thing that we'd talk about anyway. So socialism can mean a lot of different things, a lot of different people. And I think that when we talk about these sorts of things, whether it's socialism or capitalism or fascism, in different contexts, all of these things can mean different things. So, for instance, some people say that capitalism can only exist if there is completely open and free markets. Some people say that socialism is only when the government controls all of the means of production and, has the centrally planned economy. I think that we can all agree. Hopefully, we can agree on the definitions before we go forward. For me, capitalism is a mode of production in which the means of production are owned by an individual or a small group of individuals. And there's the ownership of private property in that way, and all of the goods and services are made and given for profit. So that's my definition of capitalism. Socialism, I think, is worker-owned means of production, and the mode of production is geared towards meeting the basic needs of people first, and the more consumption commodity part comes second. So that's how I would define these two things. And then communism, I think, would be the final stage of socialism. Socialism being some sort of transitory period in between capitalism and communism, much like mercantilism was between feudalism and capitalism.
Now, Gray Cat, you've been very, very, very patient here. If you just wouldn't mind giving what your definition of socialism is, and then you can jump right into your responses, and I'll let you guys kind of get out of here.
Yeah, well, one has to be patient when dealing with socialists. So I'll start out where Sanzel did by defining capitalism. In my view, there isn't really a capitalist system. Capitalism is just the natural consequences of a society which seeks to do trade and also seeks to enforce property rights. Private investment, private ownership of the means of production, private ownership of money, and the ability to accumulate money is just the natural, logical extent to a society which wants to trade more efficiently and respects the individual ownership and the right to do so. Socialism is a economic and political system which owns property publicly and is organized by a centralized socialist state, which derives its authority from a potential communistic utopia, which the state seeks, well, the state says that they will eventually achieve after the state is able to take control.
Got it. Sanzel, do you have a problem with that definition?
Yeah. So again, capitalism just being the natural way we organize logically, naturally. I don't know what you mean by this, unless you just mean capitalism equals markets, because there's a marked difference between the
mute yourself when you're not talking.
Yeah, you're breathing into the mic, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
So capitalism is the way that we naturally organize and how we logically organize, but we had very, very obviously different modes of production before this, in feudalism and mercantilism, right? One second. I'm going to pause my alerts on my stream really quick. So I don't know what you mean by it's the natural way that we organize. It's the logical way we organize.
So to be fair, there wasn't any production really until we had private property rights and the ability for people to invest in that property.
So there wasn't.
Let me finish. I let you go on.
Let him go. Let him go, Sanzel.
All right. Maybe you need to mute yourself as well. For some apparent reason, socialists have told themselves this bedtime story where there was this strict ideological change where we went from this thing called feudalism, which has its own strict boundaries, and then we eventually changed to capitalism in this weird systemic change that apparently was top down. And people just decided this is our new economic theory, we'll just do this. That's not how capitalism came about. All right. There have been markets and private production and private ownership to certain extents all the way back to prehistory, as far as we know. One of the earliest factories that was built to manufacture sort of line manufacturing, sort of forge systems, was built in the 13th century in Venice. We have early examples of capitalistic economic blocks all the way to the 11 and 1200s. Past that, we also have things like we have economic leagues in Germany and the Baltic states. The Hanseatic League is a good example of that, where multiple city-states in a world of feudalism had decided that the middle class and the upper middle class, basically the wealthy non-aristocrats, decided that they would be allowing for private investment, and those places became capitalistic powerhouses in a world of what you would call feudalism, though it's not necessarily a label that fits well over many parts of the world. Capitalism is just the behavior that people who have tried to create markets and trade on them have gotten to, and capitalism has evolved into what we have it as now. It's not some book thing a bunch of people back in the 1300s read and decided, oh, we'll do the capitalism now.
So we can move, I think we can move right past, hang on, we can move right past definitions and get right into the, hang on, we can, I'll tell you how. We can move past the definitions because you each have each other's definition. If you disagree on each other's definition, you guys can fight over that too. That's fine. I'm just telling you that you do have each other's definitions. So I'm going to allow the sparring. Try not to go past 1 minute when you're doing the sparring. Try to keep a nice back and forth for me if I need to. If the conversation starts to derail, I'll step in. But Sanzel, go ahead now that you have his definition, and you can make a defense if you want to, or whatever you want to do.
Sure. Yeah. So I take a lot of exception to what you just said. No production until we had private property. Was there just no goods ever produced? Did people not create clothing? Did people not create pottery? Did people not produce food? I don't know what you mean. There was no production until we had private property. So I guess we're going to have to define literally every single word here if we can't even agree on what production means, right? I agree. Capitalism wasn't just something that a bunch of people created in a lab and then we implemented it, and then now we went from mercantilism into capitalism. It progressed over a long period of time into what we know now, and that's exactly my argument for what we should do with socialism. I'm not saying that we should just have like a revolution now, get rid of the current system, tear it all down, and try and build up a new system from the ashes like a phoenix. No, I think that what we should be doing is having a long progression where we build up the systems inside the state and outside of the state, just like they did with capitalism, right? Just like they did with the things that you were listing earlier off from Venice and in Germany. Eventually, these things turned into powerhouses in capitalism, right? I just think the same thing can happen with socialism, and I don't understand why it wouldn't, and why we should try to change or try to stay in one mode of production for the entirety of the human race.
The why wouldn't part is telling. It sort of harkens back to Marx saying that the socialist revolution, the victory of the working class over the bourgeoisie, would happen naturally in his lifetime. Then it didn't happen then. Then Lenin said it would happen in his lifetime. It didn't happen then. Then Stalin said it would happen in his lifetime, and it didn't happen then. And eventually, the asshole that came after Stalin had to say, "Well, it's not going to happen. So, stop fighting for it. We're just going to stick to our little dictatorship." In the meantime, though, between Marx and now, we've had untold numbers of regimes who have risen up to do the socialism, have killed a few million people, have done a bit of genocide, and then finally collapsed until capitalism could rise from the ashes like a phoenix.